So you should see a poll here that has 3 questions. And I'd like you to answer those questions just based on your current knowledge of how classes will occur at different campuses this year. Can folks see the poll? I see. I'm getting some answers coming in here. Y'all are smart. Good. I'll give you another 15 seconds here or so. See a lot of responses coming in. So I'm going to go ahead and end just for the sake of time. And the 3 questions here. So synchronous instruction occurs only face-to-face, false. And we'll talk about the ways in which synchronous learning together, learning at the same time and same place, can occur both in person and online. Comparing online and remote instruction. Online is typically asynchronous, while remote includes synchronous instruction. Online includes synchronous versus remote is entirely asynchronous, and there's no difference. The answer is the first one. I'm sorry. Online, the answer is the second one. Online includes synchronous instruction, while remote is entirely asynchronous. And lastly, hybrid or high-flex instruction allows students to learn in person or online, and that is true. So that gives us just sort of a baseline of what I will use. This, I did not develop this, but I found it just as I was preparing for this discussion. There are a bunch of different ways that students may be engaging. They may be engaging fully in person. That is highly unlikely at any campus that I know of, certainly in the Boston area, and really from what I've been seeing across the country. But that is typically how our students have been engaging in classes. The ways in which these course models are different is where. So where are they in person in a space, or are they engaging online? When? At a scheduled time together always, or at the student's own discretion? And how? So via classroom technology, mobile, portable technology, etc. And the common distinctions that we're seeing come out for fall 2020 include what I would call this high flex model down in the bottom center, where it is a classroom-based instruction where students can be in person with some limitations perhaps, and online at the same time. And they will be recorded and available for reviewing later. And it's typically, the flex piece is that it is the student's choice as to whether they engage remotely or in the classroom. And I'll say one caveat about that in a second. So it's really about student choice as mode of engagement. And that can change class session to class session, week to week, etc. Fully online, some of our campuses are going fully online. So they will not have that in-person option at all. It'll be mediated solely through typically Zoom, perhaps another modality. So that will be fully online. There is an important piece to talk about there. Hybrid is an old way of describing the high flex. Some of us used to go to class maybe once every 4 weeks, and then all the rest of the work was done online. I'm not going to talk too much about that. But the main ways that I'm seeing folks describe their learning is this high flex. BU is calling it learn from anywhere, Northeastern's calling it NU flex or something like that. there's some flex in there, and then this fully online model. But there are some important, sorry if this is a very dense slide, there's important terminology that I wanted to just discuss. So one is this asynchronous, synchronous. So synchronous means same time, same place, or basically same time. We're all meeting together, and in our world in the fall, that means some of that could be some of you in class, some of you engaging remotely. But there's a time when we come together with the instructor. Asynchronous means learning is done at your own, basically kind of not really at your own pace, but at your own time. And classes this fall are likely to have both components, whether you're fully remote or in this high flex. So there will be some learning that will be synchronous, maybe scheduled office hours or scheduled tech-in time, even if you're fully remote, and an asynchronous meaning fully, but there will be some learning that will need to be done at a different time at your own time. Remote and online, so we've talked about, so remote is this, what we've been talking about in terms of this sort of high flex model. It's not fully online because it has this synchronous component built into it. Online typically is meaning this fully online asynchronous environment. Talked a little bit about hybrid and flexible instruction. This typically signals that there is a synchronous component, but there's both in-person and online learning. With the exception of something called platooning, and different campuses may be calling it something different, but in the event that your students have an option to attend a class online, in person, it may not be possible for them to attend every class session in person because of social distancing requirements in classrooms. So we've had to de-densify our classrooms. So classes will typically be divided into subgroups or platoons, and maybe one every three class sessions you'll get to be in person. And a lot of this might be the case a lot for our large lecture classes that your students might be engaging in, but it also could be in a 20-person class where there just isn't a room available at that time to enable 20 people to be together in a socially distanced environment. And I'm not going to really touch on this hybrid instruction. It's sort of an older version. We're not really doing that this fall. I should say there will be time at the end. I'm going to pace through this fairly swiftly, but I did leave time at the end for us to talk about for you to ask questions. I will try to answer them. So modalities, so I threw a lot of terms at you. And again, this is kind of what your students are going to be facing. They're going to get these words that may mean one thing on one campus and one thing another, and what I really need to sort of parse out what that means for that student attending that campus in a specific program. And that's going to be a challenge for a lot of you in terms of coaches, but it's an important thing for you to talk through with your students and make sure they understand exactly what their options are towards keeping them safe and able to learn effectively and successfully. So it's going to look the same and yet different. So we'll still have schedules, and we'll still have a semester basis for most of our coursework. I would say, so instruct around attendance. So we will still take attendance. There are ways to take attendance. But just be sure that if your students intend to learn or can only learn remotely or online, make sure they understand the attendance policy for their class. Because some instructors may say that with the addition of a remote option, you are expected to be sort of more 100% compliant with attending class. So just make sure they understand what this remote environment means for how engagement will count towards that, because missing so much can affect their grades. Office hours and academic support, I think you're going to talk a lot about that in the next hour, but in terms of, they will almost all be done virtually. So that you should just, again, be comfortable and know how to access those support options virtually. And in most part, grades are returning to the more traditional letter grade, or however your campus traditionally grades. So spring was pass fail, credit, no credit in a lot of cases because we had to make this adaptation, but your students should expect to be graded on a regular scale coming this fall. So I'm going to talk that was a little bit about how going to class looks different, or about what, but a little bit more about what learning will look like. And I'm going to return to our two students. Again, on the left is fall 2019, my apologies. So Alicia's getting ready for her Anthro 101 class. Based on the syllabus, they need to read 2 chapters in the primary textbook. Alicia missed the last class, but they got notes from their friend who mentioned that there would be a quick quiz on the texts at the beginning of the class, that they should bring their laptop to class, and so they could do a research project. They were confused by some of the concepts in the last week's reading, so they need to find time to go to the instructor's office hours this week if they don't conflict with their work schedule. So that was Alicia, fall 2019. Rashid, fall 2020, is getting ready for his Calc 3 class. This week, his platoon is scheduled for class in person, but the forecast is calling for 6 inches of snow and below freezing temps, so he decides to give his in-person slot to his friend and attend remotely, even though his internet connection dropped in the middle of the last class. Consulting the learning management system module for class, Rashid notes that the instructor has posted a slideshow that he needs to review, in addition to the textbook chapter that he needs to review. There's also a link to a problem set that is due the day of class. Rashid missed a couple of questions on the last problem set, so he goes back to review the recording of the class where they worked similar problems. So very different ways of learning going on here. And I know you're all familiar with chat. I wondered if we could use the chat function here just to record answers to this question. So what is different about learning in those 2 scenarios? For Alicia in fall 2019 versus Rashid in fall 2020. What's different based on those quick scenarios?
Can we maybe go back one slide to the 2 scenarios?
Oh, sure, sorry. Good, good. So I'm seeing a couple of themes emerge here. One is, you're right, Rashid has many more options. So in some ways, you know, I think a lot of us are saying fall 2020 is going to be great, you know, it's going to be very challenging. And there are challenges, certainly from my eyes, see some challenges. But there is some flexibility built in. We have weather. Students get sick. You know, they have things come up. They can't get to campus. They get stuck in traffic. So there are, or the T breaks down. So things happen. And so this fall is really giving students some options for continuing their learning, continuing to be successful that we didn't have before. It is more complicated though, because I think the expectations are that not only will there be sort of the syllabus, the text we need to review, and that there may be other things that they need to do to prepare for class. Discussion board prompts. They may have to do a problem set, as Rashid has had to do. They may need to review some recorded slideshows, and typically those, or micro lectures that will help them with the materials that will be covered in a class. So there may be more for them to do in preparation, although they will have some options. And it will be easier for them to go back and review things that they maybe didn't catch the first time through. And so I think, you know, the tendency is to think fall 2020 is going to be challenging and difficult, but I think it's opening up some options and some spaces that will then you as their students coaches and the students will need to manage those options and those spaces. So this is my crystal ball. This is certainly how I'm thinking about my teaching this fall is, you know, so how will learning be different? So increased synchronous engagement of students learning remotely via platforms such as Zoom. So there will still be that synchronous aspect. Increasing use of learning management systems to deliver course content and for students to engage with the content, the instructor, and each other. I'm going to talk a little bit about learning management systems in a minute. I know for our own college, the move to remote in the spring uncovered the fact that not all of our faculty members were using our learning management system for their courses. That simply will not be an option this fall. And so students should become familiar with how those are laid out, where they access those kinds of things, and know that there will be engagement that will be expected through that system. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And again, increasing emphasis on active learning before, during, and after class. So as I mentioned before, review things, not just the stuff that's on the syllabus but that's posted on the learning management system, take a quiz, et cetera. Students will be asked to use collaboration tools to participate during the class session, as well as outside the class sessions. And students may be asked to reflect on or demonstrate learning after class through journals, discussion posts, and quizzes. So again, it's this pre, during, and after. And the during piece could be through a synchronous learning time or in office hours or something like that. So typically, these are the options that I'm seeing. So some kind of, that our students are going to need to engage with, some kind of remote instruction platform, typically Zoom, will be used for kind of meetings, synchronous class times, a learning management system. The common ones are Blackboard, Canvas, Moodle, and Google Classroom for course materials, et cetera, and online course delivery. So fully online will be delivered through these learning management systems. And then course tools. And we're going to talk a little bit about sort of what that Zoom, I know we're all kind of sick of Zoom, but this is the Zoom environment. For the most part, students will be asked to mute when they join, and most instructors would love to see your faces, but we know that also affects bandwidth. So, but you want to make sure you're familiar with those controls and what the norms are for those classrooms. Remind your students that, like this session today, most classroom sessions will be recorded, saved, and made available to students. They will be made available, typically the best practice is through the learning management system. So they're not going to be, students should take care not to just post a recording out on a social media site or a site that's not password protected. That's a security thing. It also helps to keep the classroom community safe for students to engage and contribute. I'm just gonna check time here. Okay. But just remind them it's a recorded environment. Their words may be reviewed by someone else at a later time. And just as another example, I don't know if folks are familiar with what's available through the participants link. So you can go to that participants link up at the very top, and I'm going to ask you to find that and just click yes or no as to whether you actually found the participants link. Excellent. So that participant link, it's a great way of quickly kind of assessing reactions to things, yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down, go faster, go slower. So it's a really quick It's also a place where you may be asked in terms of engagement to click a button that says raise hand. I don't see that in this Zoom room here. Here we go. You can wave, you can do all kinds of things, but there typically is a raise hand function in the participant section. So if you want to ask a question, that's a place that literally puts a little hand in your video face. And it can be used to, terrific. Thank you for someone that actually has done that. Thank you so much. It may be a way the instructor tries to moderate engagement in the class to actually raise hand and lower hand, so become familiar with that. It's also a place where you could potentially, I could unmute you. There's some things that I can do as an instructor here, and you can actually, it's just a quick engagement kind of tool. So I'm going to close that out. And this is another, this is a confusing slide. I've got a lot of things open, but this is what your students' workspaces may look like in a synchronous session or online class. So this is another way to engage. So there is through when I'm screen sharing a PowerPoint slide like this, you have the option to annotate that. Right, so I'm going to click that annotate. It's going to bring up some tools here. And just as so an instructor, this might be a brainstorming session. This might be a quick Q&A session. It might be, you might be using it in a breakout group, et cetera. So it's just another kind of quick engagement tool that I thought we could stop this. Sorry, I've lost my mouse. I'm sorry, I've just lost my, oh goodness. I can't seem to clear out. Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
It's all right. What, do you want me to?
I want you to stop the annotation.
Maybe if you click the escape.
I can't get my my mouse to go over there to the little X.
What about the escape button on the keyboard? Sometimes that helps.
Yeah, it's not letting me.
I could stop your sharing and then restart it.
Yeah, if you could stop sharing and restart, yeah, that would be
all
helpful. Right. Sorry about that.
No, it's all right.
So this is going to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Have some grace with your instructors who are going to be trying to manage this.
Well, we're trying to fix this. That's a very appropriate question we got in the text, was whether instructors themselves are going to get any training or PD on how to use these resources.
Oh yeah, so we do. So yes, but I would say certain campuses have been doing more of this along the way. But we have our Center for Teaching and Learning has been very actively posting training sessions about how to use Zoom, how to use learning management system, how to engage students in a remote environment, best practices. So we're getting a lot of stuff. It's yeah, but we need to practice too. So we need practice. We need to also then figure out how it will work in our classes. And basically, we're essentially redesigning all of our classes to be online classes this summer. Right. So given our time, I was going to have you actually practice that annotation, but maybe we'll take about 30 seconds to practice annotation. So what I would like you to do is go to that annotate function on your screen and just check in, say hello, put a star, put your pointer, add some text, draw a smiley face. I love it. But this is just, again, it's just another fun kind of tool that, not fun, voila.
Look at that.
It's just another way that we're going to be trying to engage students and keep them active. Now, I will tell you, I teach at night, and my students largely work, I now teach graduate students, and they largely work full time during the day. And so I'm trying to find everything I can do in most, even in regular times, to keep students, what we call active learning. So this will be a place that students can, again, use it for whiteboarding, brainstorming, checking in, doing kind of fun kinds of stuff. It's just, again, another tool that's available. I want to quickly, whoa, now I'm still seeing all that annotation. I want to clear that, sorry.
You're just illustrating for us the kinds of things that will happen.
Yes. There, I lost, and my mouse stayed with me. So learning management systems, very quickly. Different colleges use, again, your jobs are very challenging because unless you have students that are all at one campus, but so we all use different things. Not all courses will be organized the same way. But all course content will be delivered through these learning management systems. So again, as a practice step, if I was a coach, I would want to know which thing they're using, and then work with students, develop some kind of engagement either over the course of the summer or early in the semester where they're doing some scavenger hunts. They're going and finding where they're locating, where they're going to submit their tests, and where they're going to submit their assignments, where they're going to find their readings. Readings will largely be all online. They could be different places. So how are they going to engage with this learning management system? Because that is where a lot of the instruction is being delivered. And just again, as a reminder, it's before, during, and after. So this engagement isn't enough just to read the syllabus and know I've got to read 3 things before class, and then go to class, take some notes, and I'm done. I think there's going to be more expectation that there's pre, during, and post for engagement. And again, lots of collaboration tools. This is probably where the students and you are all probably ahead of many of us, perhaps, although I would say pretty tech-savvy most days, is that we're going to be using things like Google Docs and Google Slides and Padlet and brainstorming tools that may not be solely through Zoom. So Zoom has nice features, it has some limitations. I'm not a big fan of its whiteboard, for example. So I will probably use a slide annotation tool. And so there will be oftentimes links that will be posted in the chat for you to actually engage. And so this is sort of the close of my sort of official tour through what fall 2020 might look like. And I wanted to use this moment to get you to practice going out again to the chat. I'm going to post a link here. And I'd like you to go out to that link and post questions, comments, concerns. And we'll then use that document to try to answer any kind of questions you have at this time.
And maybe while people are doing that, I'll ask you one of the questions that came in the chat function while you were talking. Someone asked the question of whether students themselves will be getting some training at their respective universities on how to use these tools. And in particular, what services are you aware that are in place to support students with neurological or other disabilities that may have sort of an added level of difficulty managing all of these engagements?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm not certain about what student training will be available. Right. I know at BU, and Mike Dennehy, my colleague, is here. I am not aware of any specific student training around using Zoom or engaging with this. So we are probably not the best example. And I know we have other colleagues from RCC and Benjamin Franklin and others that may be doing more of this. We have not done a very good job with that. So what I would say around your second question, and if a student needs accommodation, whether that is formal accommodation through ADA or an accommodation around engagement, they need a hotspot, now is the time to be engaging with those resources. Now is the time to request it. Now is the time to ask about it, because it can, a lot of times we wait until the semester begins for those things to, I'm in class, I need a recording pen, I need an extra time. They're going to be swamped. So I would strongly encourage anyone who has students who believe they will need accommodation, and again, formal or learning, other sort of remote learning, start that now. And I think people are eager, but first of all, you're giving them information. Maybe they haven't thought of particular situations. So starting now is giving them information. We need to beef up in this area, or we need to provide some resources. But it's just going to be very challenging for them to manage all of that and to get students. But we want to do that. It's going to be challenging if thousands of students are coming in on September 1st with those questions. So, are students able to access course content through a university mobile app? Most students use their phones, click on the go. Yes, so I'm most familiar with, and again, if my colleagues at other campuses want to chime in with this, I'm happy to share the answer here. Blackboard does have a mobile version, and it's gotten much better. It used to be terrible. But we do have a remote version that students can access all of your content through an app, a special app. I'm just not as familiar with Google Classroom, Moodle, or Canvas. But I don't know if others share. So another, the added challenges for non-native English speakers. So will there be any help with that? So this is, I think one of the things I've been thinking a lot about in the past couple of years in my own teaching is universal design for learning. So, captioning. So again, it is something that we should be enabling on any of our micro lectures or our recorded slideshows, providing notes, etc., is to enable some kind of closed captioning, and that's obviously YouTube. You can enable it pretty easily. So that's one space where if we're doing, if I'm not sure that I can do captioning through the way I would like to do it, I will go to YouTube and record because I know it's available through YouTube. TESOL, or not TESOL, that's our program, but English language learners, I think it will be helpful if again, the recordings, oftentimes those are closed captioned and you can review notes. That's where the use of chat and that kind of thing will help a lot. But the captioning is, I think, the major way. I think, we have a very active and prominent deaf studies program. And so they argued, I think, appropriately, they needed to be online. They need faces. They need lips and they need faces to communicate. And so I think that is another challenge for students who may be have hard of hearing, is that this remote engagement mode may be the way they want to do it because they have facial expressions and lips. So, let's see, what types of accommodations are available to students with learning differences with the increasing prevalence of remote online? How are schools being intentional about setting students up for success? What about all the students that don't have a success? Yes, I know. I want to leave that question a bit for, I know it'll be discussed in the second session, but just to note that the online learning, so I'll give you a little example for one of my classes this spring. So a student had been not feeling well but was engaging in class. And we went to do a Google Share doc, and where I was asking breakout rooms to record, and then we were annotating each other's work. That visually was very challenging for her. And for me, I had to step back and say, I, instructor, not student, I, instructor, need to anticipate that in the future. And so one of the ways we can accommodate learning differences in any classroom is to provide multiple ways of engagement. So I should have allowed her to post something in a chat or some other back channel, or to upload a file that she had written, instead of sort of the only way of engagement sort of was being driven to this one document that she was finding it very difficult to navigate visually. And so I think part of it is on us. And that's, again, I'm designing my classes right now. Everything I do has a plan A and plan B for when technology doesn't work. And has a plan A, B, C for how students can engage and contribute, whether that's in the moment or offline. So students who are engaging with me synchronously will have opportunities to contribute to a document. But I'm going to post that online and tell students who weren't there, there's the document. Go look at what your classmates did and add your comments. So there just needs to be this, it's a multiplicity of ways is how I'm kind of thinking about it. Wish there were statewide best practices where all the update with what they are doing to get students ready. I know that this is part of the selling point, but all students need this. I couldn't agree with you more. I think probably, so there's a diversity across institutions, which in higher ed kind of is our world. What troubles me is the diversity within institutions, where I think we could be doing more to, again, students, we see options and choices on one hand, and yet this lack of structure and these choices can also present challenge for students, for coaches, and for the faculty who are trying to engage them in learning and deliver excellent instruction. And so I don't have an answer to that, I'm sorry. And again, other institutions may be doing this differently and better than what I'm engaged with. But I think this emphasis on choice and options presents a set of challenges for students and those who are helping them. And I think part of the coaching needs to be around, again, understanding what those choices are and helping students to figure out what is best for them in that moment. So I see some questions coming in through the chat. How can we advocate for students when professors don't have to be accommodating or flexible? Well, that could come through an advisor. It could, so the student talking with their advisor, it could talk, so I guess I would like to unpack that a little bit. So I think advocating, so what are your, or just sort of step back from that a little bit. So what are your options for advocating for students? So a part of this is whether you're sort of coaching them to access what they have available to them. So in that case, one option is speaking with an advisor, with their faculty advisor, speaking or figuring out, do they have a sort of a dean's office, or what are their mechanisms for engaging with some kind of grievance process, or so you want to enable them to access. But I would also say that I, as a faculty member, if I was receiving some feedback from you, I would welcome that as well. So that the question is whether you're trying to advocate for the students on their behalf, or you're trying to get students to advocate on their own behalf. And if you need to do some advocation, I would start actually with the dean's office, and just say, look, coach, students are having some difficulties. What are some options here? And so that would be my way of going at it. We get maybe a couple more questions. Do you believe professors will scale back some of their content by going remote? Yes. Yes, and, or yes, but. So in terms of content, I would say kind of preparatory kind of dense reading. I think we're all trying to reduce reliance on reading 5 chapters, or sort of the more traditional ways of engaging with content. But perhaps to supplement that with some micro lectures. So again, sort of forcing a student to sort of slog through a couple of chapters. Maybe you ask them to sort of go through it more quickly, and then have read a micro lecture that might pose some discussion questions. There might be a slideshow. I'm doing a lot with one of my courses. We're going to be exploring data a lot, so students need to know terms and terminology. I'm doing a whole annotated slideshow for each of those sessions, so that they don't have to slog through the definitions themselves. They can review that and then engage the content. So I think maybe not less content, but perhaps different content that is facilitating engagement with the prime materials, the prime content during a class session. I've heard of instructors overcompensating by giving more work because it's remote. Yeah, so this is the old remote is awful. Only face-to-face is perfect. We're all great in person, but and I couldn't agree more. I think part of and that's perhaps what happened in the spring, because it was such a big transition. We had to go boom, and all of a sudden they were like, oh my gosh, I have no idea if anyone's attending class or if they understand the content, so I'm going to give more quizzes and I'm going to do more of this. Now that we all at least have a month or two to take a breath and take a step back, and we perhaps have some access to training and things like that, I think most of us are trying to be much more intentional about not more content, but complementary content. Again, multiple ways of engaging or assessing learning, but not on top of one another, but as options for students to engage the best way they can. And similarly around, I heard a lot of it around assessment. So people were doing more quizzes, and that was very stressful for students. So I see more of a return to the norm on that front. I think we're at time. So
on that note, we may have to pause here. But Laurie, thank you so much this was very, very helpful and productive and informative. And I think it only raised more questions that some of our higher ed partners would be able to speak to, or direct the coaches on where to find answers. very stimulating. And for the rest of you, we will be sharing the slides that Lori used today with you later. And if there are any more questions that come to mind, feel free to send them to us, and we'll see if we can get you some more answers. Thank you so much, Lori.
My pleasure. Thank you again. And again, I realize I went through a lot, and I probably raised more questions than I answered, but I hope I at least gave you a sense of what the fall might look like and ways that you can be prepared to help your students. And so thank you for the work that you do. It's so incredibly important and impactful. And if I can help to answer any questions or comments, I'm glad to do that offline.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.